Yeah, I think this was a bold one to give to me. One, because I have a whole fitness philosophy based on the way of rest and work, but also because I am working and going to seminary and doing my best to be a husband and have 4 kids, and I am probably the least likely one to get this right, especially in this season. It really is such a challenge. Um, Jeffrey was explaining so well the way of reconciliation and um, how we so often get in, whether they're big or small fights with other people. The way of rest and work is kind of like being in a fight with yourself, in the truest way. And I think maybe even there's reconciliation here that we do with ourselves, figuring out like how exactly are we doing this life. I'm going to comment on the, if you're looking at your paper, the icon for this. Sorry, Jeffrey. But this one really struck me funny because I was trying to figure it out. And in my mind, every time I see the icon, I go, the way of rest and work. Wink. And I'm like, I was like, I don't know exactly what that means, but it really struck me as funny. So we've got the cigarette, we've got the popping the bottle of booze, and then work and rest. Wink. So I'm going to start, because that's so distracting and funny to me, I'm going to start with our motion for this one, for the way of work and rest. And the order is important, right? And we'll get to that. It's rest and work. I so naturally want to say work and rest because I feel that's my disordered how I do everything. So rest is pretty simple. We're gonna like rest our head on our hands. For the work part, I knew there's gonna be like some sort of like motion like this, and at first I was like that, and I was like, no, that's kind of like a bear. So we're not like Goldilocks and the 3 bears. And I thought like work, like flex. I was like, no, but it's not our power, it's not our strength. So it's gonna be rest and then work. Because our work is actually for other people, right? And one of my favorite things is when Pastor Nathan is preaching and he's talking to the whole congregation, his hands are out. And I get to see his tattoo, and I'm like, that's cool. But there's this like blessing, there's this outward grace that's flowing, right? The work is for other people as well. So the way of rest and work. So I think we have a slide for our verse for the way of rest and work. And I'm going to go ahead and read it. If you want to read it along with me, you can, but then you have to stumble on the words that I stumble on also so that we stay together. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Matthew 11:28 through 30. So the community way here is that we don't work for favor, we work from favor. We don't rest from our work, we work from our rest. In the daily rhythm, it was evening and morning. In the weekly rhythm, he called the 7th day, which was Adam and Eve's first day, holy. Our individual and common work, no matter how daily or earthly seeming or seemingly secular, is for ourselves and for others. And I lost my place. For others, but ultimately, it is to glorify God in the name of Jesus and by the power of the Spirit. Some of our work will be joyful, some of it sweaty, some of it far from glorious. All of it will be resourced by rest. All of it will be a response to God's work in Jesus Christ. All of it will then be a thank you from us to God. And I'm going to go ahead and even read this counter formation because this is a really big and broad topic that we're covering in this way of rest and work. The counterformation idea is this: the way of rest and work is a way of resistance to a culture that values production over all things, workaholism, that swings to amusement as escape or sloth. So, in so many ways in our lives, we are mimics, whether we want to admit it or not. But what are we mimicking? Whose design have we said is good? And whose design have we chosen to follow? So the way of rest and work, this is physical, this is emotional, and this is spiritual. So I'm going to encourage you to try not to get fixed on like what you might naturally discern as rest and what you might naturally discern as work, right? So right now you guys are sitting, you're being very still, but you're listening to me. This is actually the work part, right? Like you guys are putting in work, putting in effort to listen to learning this way. And then later, you're going to get to stand up and move around and have whatever conversation you want to have. That's actually the rest time. So often, like rest and work, they may feel backwards, counterintuitive. What is rest? And what is work? And honestly, I think that's one of the hardest things, one of the biggest challenges we have to discern, especially when it comes to Sabbath. And we'll touch on Sabbath a little bit. What is rest? And what is work? I think this gets very confusing sometimes for the church. Last night, Pastor Nathan mentioned Pete Scazzero, and his teachings are something that really impacted my life. And one of his big tenets that he talks about is this idea of the way of rest and work. And I couldn't come up with a better opening than what Pete Scazzero says in one of his emotionally healthy books. One of his sessions starts in this way. It says, "Many of us are eager to develop our relationship with God. The problem, however, is that we can't seem to stop long enough to be with Him." The same could be said for marriage. The same could be said for like parent-child relationship. We're trying so hard to be good at so many things, and yet we can't find time to just stop and be with those that we love. So Pete Scazzero was the first person that I had heard frame this concept. The idea is that we are properly working from our rest. Most of us have it backwards. We believe that we have to do for God, and then maybe we'll find some time to be with God. We're running on empty, checking off tasks, and serving in ministry, but our inner lives are often dry and exhausted. This is what Scazzero calls spiritually unhealthy. It's an unhealthy way of living. We're prioritizing doing for God over being with God. So what does it mean to work from our rest? It means that our service, our giving, and our ministry flow out of a deep, abiding connection with Jesus. It's not a frantic, hurried effort to earn God's love or prove our worth. Instead, it's a natural overflow of a life rooted in God's love and presence. Think of it like a tree. A tree doesn't have to strain to produce its fruit. It just draws life from the soil and its roots, and the fruit appears naturally and in its season. In the same way, our work for God should be a natural result of our connection with Him. I've had this conversation so many times with so many different people, and oftentimes, like, something will get said along the lines of, well, whatever, it's not like it's life and death. And I'm going to actually argue, in fact, it is. And God knows that it is, in a way, a life and death situation for us. So I want you guys all to do something with me. Take a nice deep breath in. And now let it out slowly. Do you know what just happened? Every time we breathe in, our heart rate speeds up. every time we breathe out, our heart rate actually slows down. That is, in my opinion, how important rest and work is to our actually being alive. And God knew that it was so important that in his design, he took it out of our hands. Right? How often do you think about breathing? I mean, right now you probably are, because I just mentioned it, right? But for most of our lives, we're not thinking about breathing. We're not thinking about inhale and then thinking about exhale. If that were our task, what would happen when we fell asleep? If we were literally asleep at the wheel and breathing was on us to do, we would all die the first time we fell asleep, right? God, in his design, in his intelligent and loving, caring, wonderful design, took that out of our hands so that all day, every day, our physical body is getting this rest and work rhythm. There was evening, there was morning. I was trying to think of the best application, and I thought, okay, so when a baby's born, what's the first thing it does? Oh, it breathes in. That's backwards, because that's the work part and then the rest part. But as I thought more about creation and God's creation story, where we're talking about evening and morning, this design, these boundaries that God set up, Scripture actually says that the Lord breathed life, animating life into Adam. So in my imagination, as I'm thinking this, if God breathed life into Adam, the first thing Adam did was exhale, rest. The first thing was that his heart rate slowed down. Because if you take a deep breath, fill up your lungs, you can't breathe in more, right? Like there's even a capacity to how much air we can take into our lungs. That's how intimately designed we are when it comes to this idea of work and rest. So how do we do this? It's not easy. Our culture tells us to hustle, to be busy, to perform. To work from our rest, we have to fight against that and be intentional about slowing down. We have a capacity. Our capacity is actually a God-given limitation. It's a blessing. We are not formless and void. We have boundaries. Take a deep breath in again. There's a limit to how much air we can take in. Let it out slowly. Rest and work is a rhythm that God built into our very beings. From breathing to sunrise and sunset, we have capacity. Most of us don't like to admit that we have capacity, right? It's perceived as some sort of a weakness. Why can't you do more? You know what? God didn't make me to do more sometimes is the answer. God gave me limitations. I'm not the best at everything. Good luck telling my mind that, because I watch other people do things and I just naturally assume, oh, I could do that. I'm sure I can do that. I walk around furniture stores with Stephanie and she'll say, oh, look, that's a really cool table. And I'll say, I can make that. It's just that is my default position, but it's also the most dangerous default position to have, right? I can run and jump over that wall. Sometimes it doesn't work out the way that I thought it could, right? I could probably beat that middle schooler in a foot race until I pull my hamstring, right? God-given capacities are such a blessing, and we need to learn to embrace them and actually live into that. And sometimes, you know what, our capacity increases in certain ways. Just like physically, we can train ourselves to increase our physical capacity. We can train ourselves to increase our emotional capacity with God's help and our spiritual capacity with God's help. But the limits, the capacity, the form that God has given us is such a blessing. If we're working outside of our capacity, we're actually toxic and we're disordered. If we're working out of our capacity in one area, that affects us in so much of a way that we actually become toxic in our entire capacity, right? If I'm focused so much on work that I'm bringing it home with me in a toxic way, that affects my marriage, that affects my parenting, that affects my being a friend. If I have an issue with one of my kids or between me and Stephanie where we've refused to reconcile or I've refused to reconcile for some reason, maybe I'm not ready yet, that affects my capacity when it comes to ministry. So if we're acting out of capacity in one area, it actually affects our whole lives, whether or not we're willing to realize it. So Scazzero suggests 2 key practices to help us work from our rest. And I want to focus on those 2 things. First is Sabbath. This isn't just a day off. It's a sacred time set apart for ceasing from our work and intentionally delighting in God and his gifts. It is a day to rest, to play, and to connect with God and others without an agenda. It's a way of declaring that God is in control and not us. In the same way that every night we go to sleep, whether we realize it or not, we are saying, God, I trust you in your design that I'm going to keep breathing all throughout our sleep. Sometimes we're breathing so well, our spouse might go, stop it, because our rest and work sounds like this. But we're saying, God, I'm putting my life in your hands just by going to sleep. I trust you to sustain me. I trust that your design is good and that my capacity is good. I'm glad this isn't in my hands. How wonderful would it be if we could experience that same trust in every aspect of our lives? Second is Scazzero talks about developing a rule of life or a common way, like we're talking about this weekend. It's a trellis. It's the structure that gives shape to what's growing. That might sound formal or intimidating, even though we're doing our best to continue to explain it in a way that's very approachable. But really, it's just a simple, intentional plan for your spiritual life. It can include things like starting your day with a short time of silence and prayer. This week has been an absolutely crazy week for me. It's my finals week. I had 3 papers that were super, super long and literally no time to do them in. It's also the week that, if I look at the last month, that I made it to prayer in the morning more times than any other week recently. It's a week that I actually, even though it was still probably midnight or later, chose to stop working and go to sleep so that I could get good rest, so that I could wake up for prayer, so that I could give the kids at school my best and not just what was left over. And somehow, thanks to God, I actually made it through this week, and I'm glad to say I get to go to sleep tonight knowing that I don't have a paper to write. I went home last night from this lovely time of rest to write a paper, to finish. I was like, oh, I have a midnight deadline, and I hadn't started writing it yet. But it's so easy to fall into disorder. It takes purpose to actually say, I'm going to embrace the fact that I need rest. Not just that I'm going to fall down because I'm so exhausted, but I'm going to purposely enter into rest so that I can wake up and do tomorrow better. I'm going to rest because I know what's coming, not because I'm so exhausted from what already happened. It's a totally different way to reframe our mind. But taking time out to intentionally stop to be with God is one of the best decisions we can make. Sometimes when I plan on stopping just for 5 minutes, I usually will set a timer because I say I'm going to sit down, I'm going to close my eyes so that I can be with the Lord. And I would say about half of the time, I fall asleep for that 5 minutes. And then I wake up to my alarm. And honestly, I wake up thinking, you know what? God knew exactly what I needed. And a lot of times in this season of life, that 5 minutes of sleep is exactly what I needed. I needed to just completely shut off. And falling asleep praying to me ends up being like the way that God shows me so much grace and gives me so much refreshment. Because how better to fall asleep than talking to your Creator? So even when it doesn't work out the way I planned it, it's still such a gracious gift from God. So starting your day with a short time of silence and prayer, or stopping in the middle of the day for silence and prayer, it's such a good reset button. And the purpose is so that we can continue moving forward in a healthier way than what we feel like is challenging. I'm reaching my capacity. I'm going to intentionally stop so that whatever comes next can be a healthier version of me again. Pete Scazzero talks about that as the daily office, is what he calls it, but it's an intentional plan. I plan tomorrow to stop at this time or that time so that I can be the healthiest version of me. And maybe it's just spending time out in nature once a week, time getting away from your phone. And as we continue to talk, you'll hear, man, is this one rule or is this actually 8 separate rules? Because they're so intermingled, right? This way helps us prioritize being with God in the middle of our busy doing. It's a way of building habits that nourish our souls and keep us connected to our source of life and energy, which is God. When we prioritize being with God over doing for God, or doing for God becomes more effective and more joyful. We're no longer operating on our own strength, but on the power and love of the Holy Spirit. We find that our work is no longer draining, but it's actually life-giving. So let me encourage you to consider, what would it look like for you to stop working for rest and start working from rest? What does it look like to actually rewire our brains to say, I'm not going to work till I drop, but I'm going to stop so that I don't drop, so that the whole world gets a healthier version of me, and so that I get a healthier version of me. Real quickly, I want to give 2 very practical, I think, images of this. In one of Pete Scazzero's books, he has some Sabbath frequently asked questions. Here's one of them. What do I do about my tendency to perfectionism? And this is what Pete Scazzero suggests. We don't ever get Sabbath right. Sabbath is a day to let go of perfectionism and let God run the universe. Inconsistencies, bad choices, and learning from our mistakes are part of the point. Do your best to stop working, letting God worry about what you're not doing right, taking your focus off yourself so that you can rest in Him. And one more frequently asked question. Can I serve at church as a volunteer? Should I stop? Pete Scazzero's answer, I think as would the Trinity's answer be, yes. You can serve in your community in regard to Sabbath. Except for a very, very few, our work is not at our church. We work as secretaries, social workers, teachers, lawyers, accountants, moms, dads, at home, students, etc. Serving in our church community is not our job. Hopefully, there is delight in serving Christ as a children's worker, usher, greeter, etc. It is also important to remember that showing mercy and compassion was the missing element Jesus brought back into God's original intention of Sabbath keeping. Treating people like Christ, whether children, youth, or adults, is the heart of what we seek to do in our churches. So what is work and what is rest? That's a journey that you get to go on, not just by yourself, but as part of an intentional community. The more we talk about it, the more we share about it, the more we experience and learn from other people. For me, rest looks like working out. I love it. For a lot of you, especially you who've worked out with me, you're just waiting for me to say the words, and relax. Right? It's not, we don't all experience work in the same way. We don't all experience rest in the same way. But the more that we talk about it with each other, the more we intentionally do this life together and follow this common way, the freer we become, the healthier we become, and the easier it is to shape this idea of rest and work. Our God-given limits oftentimes we'll find are filled like from someone else, right? We weren't made to do it all. We're not a self-contained community. It actually takes other people and their limited capacities as well as we do life together as a church.